You're in church, listening to the word of your prophet. You quietly tend to your little ones who are milling about with the other children of your sister wives. Your husband, your priesthood head, lovingly looks on at his family. The prophet suddenly calls your husband's name, a devoted and hard-working man whom you proudly describe as a model citizen. The prophet calls your husband a deceptive apostate and announces that he is no longer welcome in the group. You and your children are to go with an older man. This man will not be your husband and the father of your children. How did we get here? Welcome to my podcast, How Did We Get Here? My name is Emily O'Brien, and I'm interested in everything about cults. I offer my experience as a psychiatric nurse as I look at the dynamics involved in these groups. Every week, we will examine the often overlooked allure of the macabre that has lured countless individuals into their fold. Together, we will delve into infamous cults like the Manson family, the People's Temple, and lesser known ones that just might be springing up in your neighborhood. This week, we will discuss the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the FLDS. More importantly, we will discuss the most prominent question when cults hit the news. Why don't the members just leave? While preparing for this week's episode, I watched the Netflix documentary Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey. My original plan for the episode was to review the documentary, fill in the gaps with random news articles, and retell the story of the cult. But then I became engrossed by the women's stories of their time in the cult. They highlighted how isolating their commune was, Warren Jeff's hold over his people, and how those factors made it so hard to leave. People across all types of cults have stories like this, and we need to share those stories. Similar to leaving a domestic violence situation, leaving a cult is not always that easy. To give some context, let's discuss the FLDS and how it different from the Mormon Church. So, when the United States outlawed polygamy, the Mormon Church, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, eventually came around and banned polygamy, or as they call it, plural marriages. Several groups that wanted to keep the practice broke off, but the most notorious one is the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the FLDS. A man called Rulon Jeffs got the sect under control, and upon his death, his son Warren took over. So, a Netflix documentary series called Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey was done a couple years ago about this sect. It's wild. The first episode of the series discussed the life in the sect during Rulon Jeff's role as the prophet and delved into the sect's views and practices regarding marriage. The first notable quote in the episode was, "The more wives and children you have, the higher in heaven you will be." This group believed that a man needed at least 3 wives to be at the highest level of heaven and become a god. Prophets decided who got to marry whom. Being allowed more wives was a special privilege and a sign of favor. When a girl reached marriage age, her father went to the prophet and turned her in, so to speak, to him. Roland Jeffs was known to have a secret handshake, and if you received it, you would marry him that night. Roland Jeffs had more wives than some people have years on this planet. Every wife had to give him a goodnight kiss every night. One of the women interviewed for the series was disgusted by kissing him, knowing how many other mouths he had touched that night. Warren Jeffs' gradual transition to power became the focus of the later part of the episode. Gruel and Jeffs believed Warren was destined for great things because Warren had survived being a premature infant. Warren's first taste of power was becoming the principal of the Alta Academy. This school taught the youths the way of life in the FLDS faith. Their curriculum was rooted in their beliefs. One girl described how entire parts of her school books were missing because of what they taught: the solar system, reproduction, and evolution. During Warren Jeffs' tenure as principal, more books, including the Nancy Drew series, became banned. When Roland Jeffs had a stroke, Warren seized the opportunity. He began sending out messages as though Rulon were speaking through him. He severely limited who saw Rulon, and when Rulon passed away, Warren Jeffs stepped up, using his father's widows to promote his image. In the second episode, one of the interviewees recounted how Warren married his father's widows, telling them that this is what his father would have wanted. FLDS members were afraid because they were told that Rulon would live forever and that Rulon's death was impossible. Warren explained this away by stating that he was his father reborn. This delusion still makes marrying your dad's wives pretty gross. Another concept discussed in the episode was, quote unquote, put it on the shelf. This phrase came into play when the prophet made a revelation or a rule and the followers didn't understand. This phrase and the popular phrase keep sweet are examples of thought stopping. Thought stopping, according to Healthline, is a way of blocking unhelpful thoughts. You can use it to stop you from being sucked in by negative thoughts. If you're a cult leader, it is a great tool to get people to stop thinking disobediently. Keep sweet was a phrase Warren Jeffs used to tell people not to be angry or annoyed with people in power. A wife or a daughter should not be angry with her husband or father. The second episode also highlighted Warren Jeffs' power trip. Everything imaginable became banned under his rule, from plays to guns. Even the word fun wasn't permitted in the sect. Warren Jeffs wanted his people to work, and to want to work, and pray a little on the side. The women were most affected by the rules. First, he banned women from wearing pants, and then prints, no polka dots, no chevron, no nothing. And finally he said, be done wearing red. There are also rules as to how the women should have their hair. On YouTube is a video series on how to properly do your hair in the FLDS tradition. Basically, the first step is to fluff up and volumize your hair to make your face look more like an oval. And then you gotta braid it, making sure no hair is out of place. To be honest, though, it helped me perfect my braiding technique. Warren Jeffs also banned boys. Being the prophet, he decided who would get married. He and the other elders in the church seemed to get all the young girls. This chain of events created an overabundance of unmarried boys. Warren Jeffs kicked out all the boys, which hit the news. He kicked out other men at random and reassigned their wives and children to other men. Warren Jeffs had the metaphor of obedience by a hair. He wanted his followers to follow behind him so closely that he could lead them using something as thin as a hair, and that hair would not break. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a lot of work. I would feel exhausted trying to police a group of followers every single move. Warren Jeff's vision became dark as he moved into his role as prophet. He believed that the end times were coming, only the righteous would be lifted into heaven. He forced everybody to sell everything and moved to Arizona during the Olympics, believing that the Olympics coming to Salt Lake City was a sign of the end times. Many interviewees in the episode believe that he was trying to consolidate followers and have tighter control over them. Warren Jeffs made members turn over every single asset to him. One man lost his business to the FLDS church, and Warren Jeffs was sitting on millions of dollars by doing so. One of Jeff's uses for the excess boys in his community was free labor. Boys were being trafficked all over the place, and since he didn't have to pay them for labor, it made him very rich from all of his contracting businesses. He eventually caught the attention of the media and the authorities. He hid for a long time until he was arrested and charged with being an accomplice to rape. Former followers helped law enforcement find evidence, though finding people willing to testify was difficult. Police found tapes of him having sex with underage girls, among many other disturbing things. Jess remains in prison to this day. He sure went on a power trip for somebody so ugly. Everyone deserves love, regardless of how they look. He is one of those people who's just disgusting on the inside, and it comes out in his appearance. He just looks like an ugly rat man. He knew that he couldn't get women organically, so he created a society where all of these women were able to do as he said. This nasty behavior began in childhood. One of his brothers described his unhealthy boundaries with his sisters, and Rulon just told him not to talk about it. Eventually, Warren Jeffs removed quite a few of his brothers from the religion with the justification that they were the quote unquote sons of perdition, or what they believed to be the most evil of all of hell's demons. So, I just described how disgusting and controlling Warren Jeffs is. Many underage girls suffered under his Many underage girls suffered under his direction, whether they were his wives or whether he gave these girls to abusive men. Why isn't that enough to make someone want to leave? Warren Jeffs' lectures on how the world would end scared people, and he described that only the pure and righteous would survive the cataclysm. Straying from Jeff's commandments would spell your doom. If you grew up believing that the apocalypse was coming at any moment, would you really want to leave the flock? One of the women in the documentary was married off to her cousin, who gave her the ick. She was inconsolably sobbing during her ceremony to the point where her mother had to come and calm her. She eventually choked out "I do" when she realized that her not consenting to the marriage would mean her damnation as well as her mother's. She submitted to a life of abuse to ensure her and her mother's salvation. She barely knew what sex was and grew up believing that even thinking about boys would harm her chances at salvation. At age 15, she was being thrown into a terrible situation with an abusive husband. She did what she believed was right and went to her prophet for help. Warren Jeffs dismissed her, saying that she could not know better than him about the will of God. She tried to find God's meaning in the constant marital rape and ensuing miscarriages at the hands of her husband. What can you do when this is all you know and you're not allowed to know anything else? Another woman told her story of running away. Her brother, who had been kicked out of the sect, was willing to take her. She recounted the immense guilt of leaving her salvation behind and hurting her family. She planned to escape on a Sunday, knowing that Warren Jeffs' security detail was at the latest. Warren Jeffs had cameras and people watching over the others at all times. If someone left town, everyone knew that they left. With all of this fear and guilt, she hopped the gate and ran to her brother's car. Adjusting to life outside of the group felt like being on an alien planet for her. She got a job as a waitress, and suddenly she had to learn how to wear makeup, and she had to learn the culture. She said she felt like, quote unquote, the biggest dimwit during this time. She had no idea about the outside world. She barely left her house, and virtually everything enjoyable was banned. During her time married to Ruin, her job was just to wait on her husband hand and foot. She had no other duties. Cult leaders use this tactic to make their members more dependent on them so they don't leave. Are you going to leave if you have no job skills and no money? Are you going to live in a full world that you believe is full of scary people who want to bring you to hell? Do you want to leave when you could burn alive in the apocalypse? What can you do when this is all you know and you're not allowed to know anything else? So, with all that in mind, how can you support someone who you may suspect is in a cult? I found information on Psychology Today that is pretty solid. If you're interested in helping someone leave, build that rapport with them. Talk about things you both like and leave the cult stuff alone at first. Once that rapport starts to solidify, ask about their group in a friendly and curious way. And this could get them thinking about their life. At the same time, don't overwhelm them. Don't give out a bunch of facts about why people like their leader are bad. Use empathy. Say things like, I think I would feel unsafe if someone I love kept yelling and swearing and cursing me to hell. And try to find common ground. You're not going to break their entire belief system in one conversation. They may be scared and want to leave, but afraid to express it. Your best bet is to tell them they can trust you and prove it. They will leave when they're ready. So, thank you for listening to this week's episode. Next week, we'll discuss a bizarre offshoot of the LDS Church called the Children of Thunder. If you like this podcast, subscribe for more content and share with a friend. I'm on X, Instagram, Patreon, and TikTok at EmmyCast1018. This podcast is available on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and now YouTube. Until next time, stay informed, stay aware, and safe. Thank you.